Okay. Welcome to this Climate Emergency and Sustainability Scrutiny Panel meeting. It's a slightly different one from normal, so we welcome the change. The meeting is being webcast, so if you have a better slide, turn your face that way if you're about to speak. It's a policy development session as opposed to a scrutiny session, which means we are a little bit more liberal in the way that we run the meeting, and it is genuine consultation. We are looking for advice and opinions which will formulate our policy which we are developing, which is the Climate and Nature Strategy, which is joining two action plan statements that we had before. So we're looking to hear from the perspectives from members of the public, and thank you for coming to give us your views on this very important aspect of the Council's work. I think it would be fair to say that we want to express a certain amount of urgency because those of you who are well-read know that we are reaching a sort of tipping point in our planet, and we're hoping not to tip the wrong way, and we're hoping also that we can make some difference in the way that we behave in terms of Bath and North East Somerset. So we are scrutinising the work that's been done so far. We've got Sarah, Warren and Ollie with us, who are leading in that area on the Council. So we will be looking at what they are considering doing to help push the process back to a more sane level of emissions and pollutions. So we have strategic topics. We want to empower the communities and businesses. We want to enable the right jobs and the right skills. And we want to support, probably the most important, the most vulnerable in our community, that they are involved in the transition process and don't get lost in the noise. So that's the sort of outlook. That's what we're trying to do. We will allow factual questions to the members of the public, if you have any. We don't want the meeting to go on a long time. We're doing an important job, but if we can keep comments brief, to the point, and relevant to the topics that we are working towards, that will be very helpful. So I'm now going to take my own advice and shut up and move over to the emergency evacuation procedure.
When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. Designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
And then we move on to item 3, apologies for absence and substitutions.
There are none, Chair.
That's got to be a first. No apologies and substitutions. Wonderful. So welcome to the actual committee, which I'm not sure I've ever been able to say that before. Declarations of interest. Does any member feel that they need to declare a link to one of these activities beyond the obvious? Okay, that's good. Now, I have sneaked in an urgent business agreement, item 5. It's not really urgent business, but you may recall, those of you who know about these things, that this meeting was originally designed as the first look at the Baines local plan, but it has had to be delayed, and we've got Matt McCabe with us, who is going to explain to us why that is. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, colleagues, you'll recall last week at full council I stated that we'd had instruction from government that had complicated things. Just a quick recap on where we are, because that will help. We were given permission to pursue our local plan under the old NPPF, but with the new number calculator, and you will recall that our housing target doubled. But the rest of the local plan was being pursued under the old NPPF. What's happened since is there's been a ministerial statement that has suggested that no local plan can, they couldn't contradict before, but now they cannot duplicate or exceed the policies in the new local plan. in the new NPPF. And you might say, well, wait a minute, the new NPPF...
Sorry to stop. Can you tell us what NPPF is? For those
Sorry, I'll not use any more acronyms. The National Planning Policy Framework, which the government, you may have noticed, the government was consulting on only till a week or so ago, and you might ask the question, well, how do we know which policies we're not allowed to duplicate or exceed if the document hasn't been published yet? And that would be a very valid question. So officers have been talking, obviously, with the Planning Inspectorate to try and find out what those policies are. So what I'm here to do today is give you an indication in terms of the climate and nature policies about which are in and which are out. So I'll start with the ones that stay in, and that will be the green infrastructure policies, the open spaces policies, the climate adaptation and resilience policies, the retrofit first policies, the renewable energy policies, the low impact farming policies, the embodied carbon policies, and the district heating policies. If I then go on to the policies we have decided to drop because they duplicate, and therefore we're probably not allowed to have them. So that starts with policy NE3. This refers to sites, habitats and species. And when officers looked at what we were proposing and what will be contained within the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, it was felt that the national development management policies that the government are bringing in reflect our council ambitions. Therefore, it's a duplication, and we won't be pursuing the policy. NE5, ecological networks and nature recovery. Similarly, the conclusion was that the national development management policies address our ambitions, so it's not an exact match, but that we felt that because they address our ambitions, we would therefore be duplicating and we should not proceed. CP5 and SU1, flood risk management and sustainable drainage. The national development management policies that the government is proposing are fairly rigorous in this area and therefore do address council ambitions, therefore no need to pursue policy. NE6, trees and woodland conservation. The national development management policies largely reflect council ambition. We had a reference to tree canopy, which the government doesn't, but we felt that, or my officers felt that, where the research could be done, where the evidence could be gathered, there is an opportunity via our Green Places plan to require a minimum tree canopy coverage. Therefore, it was felt that the main policy duplicates and that we do have a backup position on the tree canopy. NE4, ecosystem services. Simply, yes, we felt that the National Development Management policies address council ambitions and there was no need to duplicate. NE2, NE2A and NE2B, landscape policies. It was felt that the government's National Development Management policies do address the council's ambitions. And the general conclusion was that things do align with our ambitions and we won't be unduly impacted if we drop those policies. There's also rural exception sites, which is RA4, rural exception sites and community-led housing. The government's National Development Management policy is actually really very specific and therefore anything else we put forward would conflict with the specifics of this policy. So we felt there was no need to pursue that. So that's slightly different to duplicate. We could end up conflicting. So the advice we've had from the planning inspectorate is that really those are duplications. Our aspirations are more or less met by government government policies. Therefore, we can happily, well, we can drop even if we're not happy. More seriously, and these are the ones I alluded to last week, SC6, the Sustainable Construction Policy for New Build Residential, this will exceed what will be contained in building regs and therefore will be contrary to the ministerial statement, and therefore we have to drop SC6. We do have our policy from 2023, which was the local plan partial update. So we are allowed to hang on to that. If we don't touch it, we can hang on to that. And that is better than the position, the future home standard that the government is proposing. So if we were to pursue SC6, we could have it thrown out because it exceeds government policy, and that is an update to the LPPU policy, so it would be thrown out. We would lose it, and the fallback position of the government's future homes standard is much worse. So that's the one where we were proposing EPC-A for all new build, and the government standards are saying EPC-C. So clearly bonkers. There seems to have been potentially something in the press about putting solar panels and air source heat pumps on all new build, but we have a big issue with that. So we are proposing, officers are proposing that we fall back on our 2023 LPPU position, which is stronger than the Home Standards Policy. SC7, Sustainable Construction Policy for New Build Non-Residential Buildings. Again, our updated SC7 would be exceeding the government's home standard development management. What would it be? It would be building control standards. But the government's fallback position is better, or nearly in line with our LPPU policy from 2023. So what we're suggesting there is that we continue with the improved policy, because if it's thrown out, then actually the government's position is better than our. Does that make sense? LPPU policy. So we will continue with that one. Biodiversity net gain. This is the big one, that we cannot pursue a blanket policy that exceeds the government's policy of 10% BNG. So we have been told that we cannot do it. So my officers are looking at ways around that, in that we think we can do site-specific policies, whereby if we do the viability work, we can suggest BNG in advance of 10%. Sorry, biodiversity net gain. Sorry, thank you, Duncan. Biodiversity net gain. So our LPPU policies was 10%. The government introduced the 10% biodiversity net gain policy. We were proposing alongside some other councils that we should move that to 20%, but we have been told by the planning inspectorate that that is not acceptable and will be thrown out. So we are, I think, intending to pursue a sort of a rough and ready 20% to see if it is thrown out. But we are now developing an approach to site-specific policies, but that could be anywhere between 10 and 20%, depending on what the viability says, and obviously our officers then have to do all that viability work in advance. So I don't have my officers with me. If there are any technical questions, I will do my best to respond, but that's the approach we're taking. You will recall that last week at full council we asked the leader to write to government regarding the EPCA to EPCC stuff to say that's bonkers, because obviously living in a property that's EPCA is much cheaper to heat. It's much cheaper to heat than EPCC. So in terms of cost of living crisis, not even the climate emergency, just the cost of living crisis, it makes a lot of sense to build 1.5 million houses that are relatively cheap to live in, as well as fit for the future. But the government seems to be saying, no, somebody will have to pay to upgrade them at some point in the future. So that was my kind of update, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any technical questions? Anna?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll speak for lots of people in the room when I say it's a real disappointment, especially around the EPC, that this Labour government have missed another opportunity to make this. I think the cost of living crisis is a great point, Councillor McCabe. Just a quick question about the other disappointing news around the biodiversity net gain. I have some very passionate councillors in Compton Martin who have some views around our tree policy and around our conservation area and replacing trees that get felled around new builds or infill and such. Could we possibly have a tree policy as part of our biodiversity to say yes 10%, but then also have some kind of tree policy attached to that as well? So in some ways we are getting more biodiversity and we can replace or increase the trees that get felled from planning. Thank you.
I hope you fed that into the local plan consultation. What I can say is NE6, which is our tree and woodland conservation policy, is one of the ones we will be dropping, because the national development management policies that will be contained in the NPPF are fairly specific and everything other than the tree canopy targets that we had. So I'm afraid the answer is probably no, but hopefully the national policies will be strong enough. But please, if you could email that to me, I'll take that forward.
Do you want to speak, Sarah?
Come in on that point more widely than planning. So Matt's talking to you about the very technical aspects of planning policy, but more widely we are soon going to be publishing a council tree and woodland strategy. So it's not planning policy specific, but we will have one.
Thank you, Sarah. Eleanor?
Sorry, I thought I pressed it. Start again. Could I first of all ask if we could have circulated the information which Councillor McCabe has just given us in detail, so that we can revisit the NPPF from December last year? What I'm not really very clear about is which dispensation holds good now. So if we've got a live planning application which is going to mean considerable ecological damage to the environment, will that be under the new rules or the old rules? And I should, in addition to that, explain that I'm a director of the Radstock Cooperative Society, and we have a large site we are trying to develop. Presumably that's going to have to go under the new rules, particularly because we want to get some more houses in.
I'm no expert, so I think Matt may be able to help us.
I say this is future policy development and does not affect the current development management decision-making processes. So the local plan, the new local plan, we expect to be signed off for the draft local plan to be signed off for consultation in June at Cabinet. That carries very little weight in current development management policy decision-making. There will be the consultation, and then everything will be submitted to the planning inspector, who will then announce dates for public hearings, which we hope to be soonest February next year. So the earliest this will become the new development management policy decision-making tool will be summer 27. So I think for all development management decision-making, that's based on current policy. So we're looking ahead with this. This is future thinking. because it's not fixed yet, I will ask my officers if they're comfortable to share it with the committee, but it's not fixed yet, and we don't know exactly where we're going to end up by the time we get to May, where we'll be back in front of scrutiny or the Special Planning Advisory Group. But I will ask if they're comfortable to share this.
Share what you can, Matt, I think is probably the key. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Both Radstock and Westfield have submitted to Baines new neighbourhood plans. We hope these are going to go through expeditiously as fast as possible, but what's going to happen to the neighbourhood plan process?
I don't have that information to hand, Chair. The neighbourhood plan process, as far as I'm aware, will be running alongside the new local plan because the neighbourhood plans cannot contradict the new draft plan or the new local plan. So I'm assuming that the new local plan will be made first, and then the neighbourhood plans will be made immediately afterwards, those that are ready.
Yeah, I think I would support that. I mean, I'm the chair of Keynsham Town Council, and we have certainly stopped developing our neighbourhood plan precisely for the reason you've just given that. Anything from anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, Matt. I think you're staying for a bit, and then you can slip away and we won't complain. Okay? So we move on to public or councillor statements. The first person on my list is David Redgewell. I don't see David here, so we will pass, and if he appears before the end of this item, which is quite a long item, we will obviously fit him in at an appropriate time. So we move on to the second person on the list, which is Paul Watner, who is going to talk to us about the Somerset Coal Canal.
Morning, everyone. My name's Paul Wantner, and I represent the Somersetshire Coal Canal Communities Alliance. You have all received documents in recent days via the Guildhall, which describes in detail the concerns we have on this subject, and I urge you to read them. The Somersetshire Coal Canal is a much respected and well-enjoyed heritage asset. However, the Coal Canal Society have vision and plans to restore it to a navigable waterway along its northern arm. Baines have a policy proposal, HDSCCW, which was in the November 2025 Reset Local Plan Options consultation that supports the restoration. We believe that the inclusion of the proposed policy is at complete odds with the draft climate and nature strategy. Our alliance is formed from 5 of the 7 parish councils, landowners and residents along its route, all who object and have already objected formally to the inclusion of the restoration policy. It is our intent to have Baines withdraw the proposal for support of restoration, including the safeguarding of land. The restoration would destroy countless mature habitats that have developed in the 125 years since it closed. It would remove the enjoyment so many have from the current status. Within Coombe Hay alone, the plans include the building of 5 new road bridges, rebuilding a tunnel and an aqueduct, extracting water from Cambrook, destruction of over 2,000 mature trees, threatens the village cemetery, safeguarding of land for diversions not discussed with landowners, and the plans do not include the digging out of hundreds of thousands of tonnes of infill of the original canal that was filled in the 40s, 50s and 60s with building, rubble and waste from Bath City. This detail applies to Coombe Hay. Similar is planned for Dunkerton, Monkton Combe, Camerton, Midford, all of whom have a variety of other challenges, including threats to property survival. There are in total 22 bridges planned. There is no evidence of public support, no evidence of ecological benefit, no evidence of economic benefit, no evidence of feasibility of what amounts to a major infrastructure project for decades, and there's no funding demonstrated. This restoration and the support of Baines would rip apart rural communities, and we believe is wrong for Baines to consider a policy that supports such unfeasible and unpopular plans. Our aim is to have Baines withdraw the proposed policy, and we want this to be withdrawn now and not appear in the draft local plan. For these reasons, the Alliance respectfully ask you to look carefully into how the proposed policy has been developed and request reconsideration of its inclusion. A more appropriate approach would be to leave things as they are and recognise the historic and ecological importance of the canal corridor while supporting the conservation and protection of existing structures and landscape character. We look forward to your support in this matter, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Are there any factual questions you'd like to give to Paul Watner? Okay, thank you for your statement, Paul. I think I would like an update for this committee on where the local plan is on this issue, because I think it is something which is concerning a lot of people in that part of Bath and North East Somerset. I'd also like to add that Fiona Gawley has given us a statement on a similar line, which we have seen and we have read, so you have had two statements on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
So we now move on to Alistair Singleton, who's going to talk to us about the climate and nature strategy, opportunities and challenges.
Good morning. The paper before you today is both excellent and comprehensive. It's eloquent testimony to the exceptional quality of the officer team we are blessed with at Baines, and it's a fine start point for the climate and nature strategy update process which lies ahead. Since, and even before Baines declared a climate emergency in 2019, and I note Councillors Jackson and Walker as veterans of that historic vote, we have been recognised as a pioneer amongst local authorities in the way we've addressed the climate and ecological crises that beset us. Now there is the chance to take that leadership to a whole new and exciting level. Whatever you may be tempted to think about some fellow councillors in the dark watches of the night, my personal experience is that all, well, almost all, are good people who enter politics with a genuine passion to improve the lives of those they represent. Sometimes, though, long hours of endeavour may lead to a sense of frustration, a sense that nothing is happening, or, if it is, progress is glacially slow. It can be hard to see the improvements. And since 2019, the context with which your climate and nature work unfolds has got progressively more fraught. Almost all the dials are moving faster than the experts predicted even 7 years ago. Only on Monday, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres stated that every key indicator is flashing red and that planet Earth is being pushed beyond its limits. So, the challenge you face is stark, but equally broad is the scale of the opportunity open to you. With ambition and with courage, there is so much you can achieve. The paper argues compellingly for a move from cruder quantitative KPIs, 300 megawatts, 68,000 homes, etc., to harder but more valuable qualitative ones, so that you have the opportunity to drive forward social justice and confront the toxic inequality which is proving so corrosive to our communities and our faltering democracy. You have the chance to push not just rapid take-up of renewable energy, but to promote it being community-owned, reweaving the social fabric of the areas where it is sited. You could follow Oxford County Council's principle of future generations, so that the interests of future generations are considered in all council decision-making, supported by a future generations member champion and inclusion in a cabinet portfolio. And could we not copy Henley's Green Futures Awards, the UK's first school award to embed climate resilience at its heart? So, councillors, now is surely a time for brave and creative thinking. I urge you all to let your ambition fly free. The 2016 COP Paris Agreement spoke of countries exercising their highest possible ambition, and you surely should too. You will, of course, be confronted by the merchants of doubt, of division and of disinformation, whether emanating from the fossil fuel lobby, from Reform UK or from Bath Eastern. You will need determination, but let your courage be unbridled. If you do so, you will not only improve the lives of many, you will preserve and potentially save them. The hopes and the prospects of our children, our grandchildren, and those who come after rest on your shoulders. We rely on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, does anyone have any questions for Alistair? Well, thank you, Alistair. I thought you made some excellent points. Right, now we move on to the fourth speaker, which is Victoria Wells, who's going to make a 3-minute statement on health and environment and how this impacts the well-being of a low-income family. And Gillian Rushbigger is next, just to give you a heads up. And I'll do that each time from now on. So when you're ready.
Okay. Health and environment are interrelated and impacts are felt on people on a lowered income. Please note some of my references, you might find these statistics slightly upsetting. Inequalities in the environment impacts on residents' health. Indoor pollution as well as outdoor pollution is a significant health risk. Why we need to act now? Cancer rates are up 24% in the last 20 years in the under 50s. This is a real prospect of our children's life expectancy possibly being lower than our parents. People on a low income have less choice when making environmental improvements, such as housing, eating, food, transport, and the cost of water. These contributes to increased health risks, including acute and chronic respiratory conditions such as asthma and lung cancer, cardiovascular conditions such as heart attacks and strokes, neurological conditions, mental health, widening health inequalities, deaths due to excessive hot and cold weather, particularly in vulnerable groups such as babies and older people, people with disabilities, and long-term health conditions. For example, there were around 3,000 excessive deaths during the heatwave of 2022 in England. This is nice sustainability. Wellcome Trust, the World Health Organization, has called climate change the single biggest threat facing humanity. And the Lancet Countdown Report 2022 states climate change is undermining every dimension of our health and collectively. Wellcome Trust environment, driving equity health outcomes, a healthier future for everyone can only be achieved if the world and everyone works together. And the Wellcome Trust are doing a lot of work around this. Mitigating effects. People who have direct access to green spaces on their doorstep are less likely to have hospital admissions. Nice guidelines. Having access to accessible and affordable transport, in addition to creating better air we breathe here in Bath, this would be a good health outcome. Remember, not everyone rides a bike. With increasing ageing population and disabled people, this affects their mobility. Safer pathways that are not blocked by cars, bins, street signs, scooters and bikes. Creating safer roads to cross, travel on that are accessible and that are key to a healthy environment. This is a key outcome. Planting up our streets to lower temperatures in the summer and increases biodiversity. This is a good health outcome. Climate and nature recovery needs to be inclusive to all residents regardless of income. Working together with residents, communities, business to achieve better health will protect our landscape city, surrounding areas for future generations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Victoria? Yes, Anna.
Thank you for your statements. Just a quick question. Were you aware that at the previous meeting we had a air quality strategy come to the panel? And have you got any input on what was said?
No.
Well, you'd be very pleased to know we've got some incredibly good targets. I think better than the WHO. Is it in keeping with the WHO targets, Sarah?
Yes, we discussed at the previous meeting the possibility of adopting some more stringent targets locally for air pollution than government has set.
Yeah, I don't know if Sarah said that, but we are having the air quality back in July, so you could watch it on video and learn more about what we're trying to do. Thank you. Right, so we have Gillian Ross-Bridger, I hope I said that correctly, and Jenny Lambert is after that.
Gillian Risbridger. A small plea for urban trees. Mature trees, as you know, provide immense, irreplaceable environmental benefits, including massive carbon storage, significant oxygen production, air pollution filtration, and erosion control. They are critical habitats for wildlife and provide shade that lowers temperatures. It takes decades to replace the ecological, aesthetic and functional value of a mature tree. Stop cutting down broad-leafed mature trees and replacing them with a monoculture of saplings or semi-mature trees that are not maintained and therefore die. Examples: Lower Bristol Road near Churchill Bridge. 3 mature trees cut down, replaced by 4 semi-mature willows and beautiful grass. 1 tree flourished, 3 chopped down as sickly and replaced with saplings that were then bent over by drunken louts. Maintenance vehicles keep parking on the grass, and now we are left with weeds, mud and 1 willow tree. North side of the river by Avon Street car park, mature trees cut down as they were in the way of the building site. Still a hideous building site as COVID prevented North Quays development, no replanting. Riverside planting is a monoculture of willows. Wildlife flowers were planted. They looked beautiful the first year, okay the second year, and now they're swamped by nettles and thistles. Willow arch, never maintained, third died back, not replanted. Plant vegetation, not bollards. On the Lower Rolls Road, recently had new works, new traffic lights, increased asphalt pavement by about 12 metres, with bollards to prevent car parking. Instead, permeable or porous paving, including grass, concrete pavers, gravel, porous asphalt, could have been used to let water infiltrate the ground, reducing flood risk and surface pooling, together with planting vegetation like small trees, hedges or shrubs, better for nature and better aesthetically. So my 4 very small asks are the council must put preservation orders on all mature trees in Bath, and developers can work or plan around them rather than automatically removing them. 2, nature needs a variety of trees, not a monoculture. Plant microforests. 3, newly planted areas must be properly maintained until the vegetation is established. And 4, build porous pavements with vegetation rather than wide asphalt pavements with bollards. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Eleanor.
Thank you very much for this very useful information, but it only, in what you're saying, applies in Bath, it seems. Do you not think that North East Somerset, Keynsham, Midsummer Norton and so on should have similarly protective policies?
If I had more than 3 minutes, then I could have expanded it. But I live in Bath, and these are 2 examples within 5 minutes of my house. So, yes, the whole of Baines could do it.
Are there any other questions for Gillian? Okay. Thank you for your statement. We now move on to Jenny Lambert, who's going to talk to us about practical solutions and relative impacts of different changes and the importance of public education and motivation. And after that, Sue Paul, when you're ready.
Hello. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. My only agenda is I want all life on this planet to survive for the next 1,000 years. So if someone living in Bath in 2125 could look back on this meeting, what would they actually thank you for prioritising? I'm starting here because whether we like it or not, this room shapes the future people will inherit. Future residents won't ask what we planned. They'll live with what we actually prioritised. I'm here because I trust that everyone in this room understands the severity of the climate crisis and that you're all already trying to protect our shared future. I also recognise how hard it is to turn understanding into action when budgets are tight, politics change, and every decision competes with many others. My aim today is not to add pressure, it's to support you by focusing on what is both high impact and genuinely within your control. One of the Council's most powerful and often underestimated roles is education and norm setting. People copy what they see as normal, and councils shape what looks normal. Small visible signals from institutions don't just reduce emissions directly, they quietly give thousands of people permission to change. The biggest opportunities here are already familiar, trying to increase the retrofitting of homes, reducing car dependence. Did you know you can save £3,000 a year by swapping your car for a bike? Cutting energy waste, protecting trees and shade and water. Plants can only absorb currently 1/3 of the carbon dioxide we're producing. We need them more than anything else on this world right now. And supporting businesses to transition. The challenge isn't knowing these matter, it's how clearly the benefits of change are communicated, how visible they are, and how easy they are. When low carbon choices are framed as loss, uptake stalls. When they're framed as savings and well-being and pride and community, behaviour does actually shift. Councils own a lot of buildings, land, schools, food contracts. That gives you a rare ability to model the future in public, making plant-rich meals default in schools and council buildings. Because actually that would free up way more biodiversity than housing standards. Making energy visible, so solar on all council houses by default and public buildings. Making water fountains normal. It costs you more to dispose of one plastic bottle than it would be to pay Wessex Water for 500 mils for a fountain. Making closed doors, solar panels, shade and trees part of everyday life. Of course, sorry. Ultimately, you can make things visible and normal. What do you think people will say about this meeting in 1,000 years' time? Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Are there any questions for Jenny? Okay, thank you for your statement, Jenny.
Thank you.
Right, now we move on to Sue Paul, who's going to talk to us about the update climate and nature strategy. I don't believe Adam Gretton is with us. He has emailed his statement to us. So the last speaker is Alex Jones, who will be after Sue. So when you're ready, Sue.
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Climate Hub in connection with the development of the combined climate and nature strategy. We welcome the intention to learn from elsewhere and also the recognition of climate injustice and the need for a focus on equity as part of the transition process. And we suggest this should include proactively engaging with less often heard and marginalised groups. In terms of reference documents, we strongly suggest that the National Security Assessment on Global Biodiversity Loss, Ecosystem Collapse and National Security should be added to highlight the urgency of the situation, especially when it comes to looking at the resources for tackling these issues. We support the big shifts, but suggest that these will need policy shifts across the Council. For example, what practical steps might be considered and taken in respect of buying and wasting less when our high street, especially in Bath City Centre, is so geared to consumerism. We need to start reimagining our high streets as places for learning, sharing and growing as communities, and repurposing away from the traditional buy more new stuff style shopping street. In relation to enablers, it looks like a great list, but we would like to ask what practical support the Council is going to provide to the voluntary and community sector to support their role in communicating with our communities and bringing people and businesses on board. It's recognised in the strategy that there are many green or eco-focused VCS organisations working with and in communities across Baines, in many cases with very little financial support and relying on a vast amount of volunteer input. Speaking from experience, this can be exhausting, from creating and running events and activities to raise awareness and support people's positive engagement with the climate and nature crises, to fundraising, keeping organisations going, bringing in new volunteers and working collaboratively with others. It would be a great encouragement if support in writing could be translated into real practical and financial support to back the work of organisations like Climate Hub and others who are working so hard to engage with our communities and to help deliver a more positive future. For example, funding to put on large events such as the proposed Big Bath screening of the People's Emergency Briefing, how is the venue to be paid for? Funding to support VCS-led engagement to raise awareness, to train facilitators for climate cafes to support people experiencing climate anxiety, to support networking and to offer some relief from the constant struggle to raise funds to do what is recognised as urgent work. We therefore encourage the Council to be imaginative and innovative in developing new ways to bring funding to a strong climate and nature strategy. For example, green bonds as developed elsewhere to support green infrastructure, and maybe setting up funds for green growth specifically in the voluntary community and community sector in partnership with other anchor organisations for a start. Members are, of course, really welcome to pop into the Bath bus station and find out more about our work and of the other VCS working in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Are there any questions for Sue? Okay, thank you for your statement, Sue. So we move on to the last statement, which is Alex Jones, who's going to talk to us about the work of the Bath and West Community Energy Group.
Hello. My name is Alex Jones, Director of Operations and Impact at Bath and West Community Energy, or BWCE. Today I'd like to talk about the impact of our work in Baines, supported by the close working relationship we have with you, our local authority. Community energy means renewable energy projects that are owned and led by local people, with profits reinvested back into the community. Instead of distant commercial developers, community organisations raise funds from local residents, build renewable generation like solar or hydro, and then use the income to cut carbon emissions, support households and strengthen local resilience. Back in 2010, Baines Council helped us get started when we worked together on school rooftop solar, our first projects. Today, BWCE is one of the UK's largest and most established community energy organisations. We operate around 46 renewable energy projects, including 39 rooftop solar, 6 ground mount sites and 1 hydro installation. Our renewable energy capacity is about 15 megawatts, and we generate enough electricity each year to meet the equivalent annual demand of 5,200 homes. Alongside generating clean energy, our community fund distributes surplus revenue to local projects that reduce carbon emissions and tackle fuel poverty. To date, we've donated £470,000 to the fund, and 119 local community projects have been awarded grants. From Share and Repair to the Genesis Trust or Marksbury School PTA, our funding has supported a range of causes, demonstrating the positive cycle where local clean energy directly funds social and environmental benefit. BWCE has grown into a pioneer in the sector, continually developing new models and testing innovative approaches, from large-scale solar to retrofit support for individual households. Our work is rooted in the belief that communities can and should play a meaningful role in the energy transition. Our latest Grand Mount solar project, Fairy Hill and Compton Dando, will be trialling a local supply project, enabling households in the community near the solar farm to benefit from lower cost, locally sourced, clean energy. And a major reason we've been able to deliver at this scale is our long-standing partnership with Baines. Collaboration on planning, site access and strategic alignment has enabled community-owned solar on schools, public buildings and community sites. The partnership unlocked opportunities that simply wouldn't have been possible otherwise, and it stands as a strong example of what can be achieved when councils and communities work side by side. As the Council reviews its climate and nature strategy, it's clear that tackling the challenges ahead will require a combination of ambition, collaboration and community involvement. Community energy is one of the areas where those come together most effectively. The BWC example illustrates that with high ambition and enthusiasm, we can find different ways of getting things done. We've shown that these can bring benefits far beyond energy to help Baines in their aim of improving people's lives. Thanks for listening.
Very well timed. Impressive. Any questions for Alex? Okay. Thank you very much for your statements. I'm active with the Keynsham Community Energy Group, so I know the work well that you do, so well done. Okay, so we come to the end of the public statements. We need to agree the minutes from the previous meeting before we get on to the major item, which is the climate and nature strategy item. So, item 7, the minutes. Do I have a proposal to accept the minutes? Thank you, Anna. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Karen. Okay, those in favour of accepting the minutes, please raise your hands. Okay. We can take a short break if you want one, Councillor Hampton, yeah? So a 5-minute break. Right, okay. So I made the mistake I was about to thank all the speakers that had come to speak. I should have done that before the break because quite a few of them have disappeared. But those who are still here, thank you for your contribution. If you feel you have a significant point to make, put your hand up and I'll actually let you speak, which is a first for me because I'm usually quite miserable and don't let anybody speak. So if you feel free to speak, then if you have something you really want to say, then put your hand up. Okay, so I'm going to pass over for quite a big chunk of the next part of the meeting to Sarah Warren and Ollie Henman, who are going to take us through where they are so far with the climate and nature strategy. So over to Sarah.
Okay, so in terms of the plan then for the rest of the morning, we're going to start by hearing some short excerpts from the National Emergency Briefing, where I had the privilege of representing Bath and North East Somerset on the 27th of November last year at Westminster Central Hall, alongside 1,200 guests, politicians, leaders of NGOs and voluntary organisations and civic leaders. 10 of the country's leading experts briefed us in stark detail on the latest state of the climate and ecological challenges that we face. So today we'll hear a short section from Chris Packham's opening words, a little bit of climate science from Professor Kevin Anderson, who's Professor of Energy and Climate Change at the University of Manchester, and then some thoughts on social tipping points from Professor Tim Lenton, who's Director of the Global Systems Institute at the University of Exeter. Then we're very pleased that Dan Green, Group Sustainability Director at YTL UK Wessex Water, is here with us to share his organisation's sustainability framework and key projects. And as a key civic partner of the Council, we very much welcome him joining us today. Then Councillor Waite will continue to chair the meeting, but if you don't mind, members of the panel, we thought of inviting you to come and sit perhaps around the central table to have a bit more of an informal feel. Officers will present highlights from the paper that you've received and respond to your feedback, and we'll aim to have some two-way discussions as we seek your response to the online strategy materials that you've seen. I was going to say there are many constraints on local government, whether in terms of the powers that we have or the funding, so we're very much still subject to austerity, having to save £12 million over the next 3 years, and in Matt McCabe's rather technical update earlier about the National Planning Policy Framework, what that was describing was one of the areas in which government is capping local councils' ambition by telling us we cannot go beyond the national level of aspiration when it comes to energy efficiency in buildings. The local government sector, so despite all those sort of constraints, there are many areas in which Bath and North East Somerset is leading the way within the sector on our response to climate and nature emergency. But we know, given the urgency, that we cannot really do enough. And that's where we just really genuinely want to hear from you about the ways in which you can see that we as a council could be doing more, faster, better, because we know that's what's needed. The other thing was to say was we hope to go into, as I've explained, a relatively informal session where we genuinely hear from you and your ideas. If we find that the meeting itself needs to go on for longer than 2 hours that have been allocated to it, what we may do is continue for a little longer in closed section, meaning that we might ask the public to leave. And the reason for that would just be to be able to have things sort of even a little more informal, so that members of the committee don't necessarily feel embarrassed if they want to ask what they might think of as a silly question or to come up with a crazy, wacky idea, and without the sense that it might be on the front page of the Chronicle. Because I think that this is a really important opportunity on a topic of this seriousness, and if we do find ourselves in closed session, what we will do then is to ensure that there's public feedback to the next PDS meeting. And I understand that this is a slightly unusual format. It's not the way these meetings usually run, and it's a bit of an experiment, but I hope you agree that this topic is important and that the committee have been seeking opportunities for genuine policy development and engagement in that process. So hopefully it is worthwhile to have dedicated the full 2-hour meeting and perhaps more time to it, and that it's worth trying out some new formats in order to facilitate what we hope will be a very genuine engagement with you. So,
if I can interrupt just for a minute, I have managed to acquire the Georgian room. downstairs where we had our pre-meeting. So we can go there if you consider that to be appropriate at the time. Thank you for letting me speak.
That's it. I mean, that's the end of my comments. So I think, are we going to go on to some types of video? Switching from Chris Packham to Kevin Anderson.
And if we look at that where we are today, we're now at 424 parts per million, almost overnight. We've gone to these ridiculously high levels, and it's rising rapidly every single year. We've driven temperatures up, approaching 1.5 degrees C warmer than at the time of the Industrial Revolution. If we don't stop burning fossil fuels, the temperatures will just keep rising. This idea that we cut fossil fuel use doesn't help. We have to eliminate fossil fuels, or the temperatures will just keep going up. The way we've set it up at the moment, the way the society is going at the moment, we're going to see a rise of about 2 degrees centigrade or so by the middle of this century. That's very hard to imagine that we'll be any less than that. But there's now a small but very real risk that we could hit 4 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. Now, the prospects of 3 and 4 degrees centigrade of warming are absolutely dire. I mean, we cannot risk that at all. There's an extreme and unstable climate, far beyond any safe zone that has nurtured our civilization. And we're going to be seeing unprecedented societal and ecological collapse at these sorts of levels. We can see escalating geopolitical instability and rising military tensions. And there will be no real economy to talk about. There's no reduction in GDP. We'll be looking at systemic collapse. My colleagues are going to touch on some of these points in more detail later on. So,
And now we're going to a section from Tim Lenton.
So the overarching message from that, we're running an increasing risk of these tipping points, including this critical one for the UK. That risk goes up markedly with every fraction of a degree of warming and every year over 1.5 degrees C. So we've got to do everything in our power to limit the amount of time we spend over 1.5 degrees C and the amount of temperature we go over 1.5. My closing case to you is going to be that that requires a radical acceleration of action towards zero emissions. And the only way we can really convince ourselves that that's credible is if I can convince you that there are also what I call positive tipping points, where the change towards zero emissions technologies and behaviours can itself become self-accelerating. So it's just like the original movie. There are different stable states of the economy and society. We're in this predominantly fossil-fueled state of the economy, but we can all picture a different economy and society powered by clean, renewable energy and a bunch of other things besides. There's certainly a barrier or a hilltop between those two states, but we've already seen how in some sectors and in some nations how actions, including policy actions, can lower the hilltop, can destabilise the fossil fuel status quo, and can activate amplifiers within the system that then create a self-propelling change from the old, emitting, dirty way of doing things to the clean, low emissions way of doing things. And we've done that in the UK. We've done it in the power sector at least. So the black line is coal burning contribution to UK power electricity production. At the peak in 2012, we got 40% of our electricity from coal burning. How much do we get today? Zero, because we've shut the last coal burning power station. Yeah. How did that tipping point happen? Well, we had a climate change and a cross-party consensus and a commitment and incentives to do the rollout of new renewables, the green, the blue, the yellow here, that now give us more than 40% of our electricity. But the falling off the cliff for coal burning also happens because something called a floor price on carbon was levied just on the power sector with the promise from the government that it would only be ever stepped up over time, and it was a pretty modest price, but it was enough to make coal burning become unprofitable. Then people start withdrawing investment from it, which makes it even less profitable, and you get a self-amplifying tipping point. In the global context, clearly we need to do more than just positively tip to clean energy. The power sector is about a quarter of global emissions. We need to tip things like home heating that we've heard about. We need to electrify personal transport and goods transport. There's 4 sectors there: power, cars if you like, trucks, home heating. In state-of-the-art modelling, we model 72 world regions, hundreds of different technologies, the coupling between sectors, the way that feedback's reinforcing change between the sectors. There's a lot of information on the slide, but the take-home message from it is, if we want to see positive tipping points in these across these crucial sectors that make up a large fraction of total emissions, then the most effective policies to bring them forwards are mandates to phase out the fossil fuel technology and phase in the clean technology. So we're talking here about the ban on petrol and diesel car sales from 2030. We're talking about correspondingly would be banning gas boilers from a point in the future, banning diesel trucks from 2040. What that does is it activates the amplifiers in the system that we all should be witnessing in the global economy, which is the more we adopt the clean technology, the better and the cheaper it gets. We're already in a world where the renewables are, together with battery storage, the cheapest source of electricity worldwide. electrification of transport is rapidly becoming the cheapest and the best option. We need the policies that bring forward the positive tipping points that can accelerate us out of trouble. So it's a narrative of kind of from emergency or peril to prosperity. This message is, I think, fairly easy to summarise. I think I've shown you the risks we're running, both in a global and in a national sense, of crossing some tipping points of the climate. And I've emphasised this tipping point in the Atlantic Ocean circulation. I probably should have told you that if we go anywhere near 2 degrees centigrade, then the odds of crossing that tipping point are definitely worse than Russian roulette, which is 1 bullet out in the 6 canisters to the gun. And that tipping point will be at least as likely as not if we go anywhere near 3 degrees of global warming. So we have to limit warming, or do our bit to limit warming globally if we want to limit that, I think, emergency risk for the UK. And we need civil society, us, and policy working together to trigger the tipping points, positive tipping points, that can limit that risk and accelerate us to a clean and more prosperous future together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll hand over to Dan. Do you know how your microphone works?
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the welcome to come and speak to you this morning and take part in this very important conversation. My name is Dan Green. I am the Group Sustainability Director for Wessex Water and YTL UK, YTL being the parent company of Wessex. I've been in the organisation for over 20 years, working in a sustainability role in various guises over that time, different departments. I'm going to talk about sustainability in the round as an all-encompassing idea, a way of looking at things. And then, rather than sticking to the theoretical for too long, move to a few worked examples of some of the things that Wessex and YTL are doing that hopefully illustrates our approach to sustainability. So, what does it mean to Wessex and YTL? That was the exam question I was set. As a concept, it's definitely not just the green stuff. I think it's very clear, and it's been clear since we first signed up to the idea of becoming a sustainable water company in the mid-1990s, that this is truly holistic. It's about the people, it's about the planet, and it's about how the business functions and prospers. So those economic, social, and environmental dimensions are all interwoven. It's very much about us being a long-term business, which we've always said we are. Sustainability, just in terms of the dictionary definition, is the ability to continue, whether it's a community or an organisation or a business or whatever. It's that long-term view which is absolutely critical. So in practice, how do we apply sustainability to what we do? It's not a nice added extra, a sort of some additional gloss and a few kind of projects along the side of the core business. It's absolutely central to the core activities of both Wessex and YTL. It's about addressing the big issues, and it's importantly about challenging the standard ways in which we do things, whether that's through clever innovation or going direct to government, to regulators, to Whitehall to say, is this approach that we have inherited over the years truly the best way to deliver the outcomes that we're all looking for society and the environment? So, a bit on the sort of conceptual frameworks. The text is far too small, I know, for you to read, but please do have a look at our annual report from last year. Suffice to say, this diagram, the top half, the orange quadrant is about the people and the places we serve, and the green quadrant is about the environment that we're looking to enhance. And that's the biodiversity, the water, the atmosphere, all those crucial components of the planet that we live on. So the top half really is the outcomes that we're trying to deliver. The bottom half is the enablers, the people who work for us, the technologies and the infrastructure that we employ, the way in which we organise ourselves as a business, the financing of the investment programmes, etc. These are all the enablers for achieving the environmental and social outcomes that we're focused on. And the approach is mirrored essentially for YTL UK as well on the next slide. Very similar, society, environment, governance and finance, and our people. We've taken the approach that's worked very well for Wessex Water and applied that to a wider collection of businesses. Other things that YTL is doing in the UK, you may be aware of Brabazon New Town in the north of Bristol, which YTL is building. So that's run by YTL Developments and is being built by YTL Construction. There's a business called Turnbull, which manages infrastructure at the Hinckley build. We've got one half of Water to Business, which is an organisation which does water and wastewater services for non-household customers. So, yeah, it's really rooted in infrastructure as an organisation, but is moving away from just doing water and wastewater. So, a few examples. I wanted to pick on 4 topics, which hopefully are relevant for this particular session. First one is around biodiversity and river catchments. So we created a biodiversity action plan in the late 1990s. At the time, a lot of it was around 2 broad things. How do we avoid causing damage to ecological features when we're doing things like laying a new pipeline across the countryside? And also, how can we work more closely with wildlife trusts and wildlife organisations on interesting projects around biodiversity? And over time, it's broadened and become a richer set of initiatives, which includes things like nature-based solutions for improving the water environment. The picture on the right is a new wetland that was created just upstream of Durley Reservoir on the outskirts of Bridgewater, where we're trying to improve the quality of the water within the reservoir, which means addressing the inflows and using things like this kind of natural filtration provided by a wetland to reduce the amount of sediment entering the reservoir. And then catchment partnerships, we're doing a lot of work across the region with various organisations who similarly are looking holistically across all the activities that occur within a catchment and looking for the best points where you can intervene and improve quality of rivers, quality of bathing waters, quality of groundwater and so on. And a lot of that is face-to-face work with farming community as well. Things like precision farming. We employ agronomists who give direct advice to farmers on the application of fertiliser and pesticides and so on, how to avoid soil erosion, water and soil management in the round. And of course, this all contributes to a more ecologically diverse river system. Okay. A bit on climate. This is an area where perhaps I've done the most detail in my work, as well as kind of the broad sustainability brief. You're probably aware that at Wessex Water we generate renewable energy using anaerobic digesters, where we take the sludge that's the byproduct of treating sewage and food waste in 2 separate processes. We're not allowed to co-digest because of the rules. And we produce biogas and biomethane as a byproduct of anaerobic digestion, and we can use that either for generating electricity or for vehicles or direct injection into the local gas grid, which is what we do at Avonmouth. In terms of our carbon footprint, though, more widely, it's not just about energy and transport. And it's clear that in the next 20 to 25 years, the big challenges for decarbonising the water sector is going to be the nitrous oxide that is produced from treating sewage at sewage treatment works, turns out to be a far bigger component than we thought it was with emerging science. The methane that's produced again throughout the wastewater system, and the embodied carbon of construction materials. Our investment programme is tripling during 2025 to 30 compared with 2020 to 25. So it's going to be $3 billion plus investment programme just these next 5 years. And that typically involves concrete, excavation, metals, sort of reinforcement materials, and all of that has a big carbon footprint. So we've got to think very carefully about how we deliver improvements for the water environment and for our customers without just shifting the burden to the atmosphere. And so looking closely at lower carbon construction materials and lower carbon solutions in the first place is going to be critical. And then we've got the adaptation side of the climate crisis. We're seeing generally wetter conditions in the west of England. That's in terms of total rainfall, and certainly the sort of October to March meteorological winter is very clearly becoming wetter. And the amount of a year's rain that falls on those days where it's classed as a very heavy rain day or an extremely heavy rain day, that contribution from those sorts of rain events is definitely increasing. So we are seeing an intensification of rainfall, and that has impacts across our business. On the social side, I wanted to just pick out a collection of work that we've been developing over 20 years plus called Tailored Assistance Programme. We work very closely with people like debt advice organisations, social charities, who really understand the coalface, the issues that low-income households are going through, and people through whichever circumstances are more vulnerable. And so we've got this sort of diverse suite of projects which are really to help out those who find it hardest to pay, for those whose living conditions are the most perilous, and to make sure that we're not kind of adding to the burden and that we're actively helping people in those situations. Again, if you go to the website, you can get a lot more information on that. I'm sure as councillors you have constituents coming to you sort of explaining some of the issues that they're facing. And if you're not already aware of this programme, then please do have a look. Hopefully it will be interesting. And then one more, which is about Brabazon, which I mentioned at the beginning. Newtown in the north of Bristol around Filton, 6,500 new homes. That number will likely rise over the years. We had the announcements last week about the confirmed new towns. Brabazon is one of the 7 that the government is backing. And of course, not just houses, but a lot of office space, commercial buildings, public amenities, schools, etc. We're very, very keen that this is an exemplar sustainable development. The office designs that you're seeing coming forward are at the sort of BREEAM excellent and outstanding scale. And as standard, the new homes air source heat pumps and solar, as you would expect, and we were hearing a bit earlier about the EPCs as well. Blue-green infrastructure, it won't surprise you to know we're looking very closely at how to best manage surface water and rainfall at that site. And you can probably just about make out in that image, this is not real yet, but this is the kind of the mock-ups, but there will be this large pond, a sort of a lake in the centre of the development, which will be one of the ways in which we'll be managing surface water. And there's an urban park right next to it. So I'll leave it there. I guess that's probably generated a few questions. Very happy to take questions and comments on any of that. But thank you again.
Okay, are there any questions for Dan? Saskia, oh, loads of them. It's generated hundreds of questions, Dan, which is excellent. So Saskia was the first one I saw.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dan, for the presentation. I guess my question is about sewage pollution. So I did a bit of research, and apparently in 2024, 91 sites were polluted 2,960 times, and this year so far there's been over 2,500 hours of sewage overflow. So I guess my question is, how can we as Bath and North East Somerset Council work with you to stop that so that our rivers are clean and good for nature and also good for people, because currently we cannot swim in the river, for example, which I think everyone would love to.
Of course, yeah. I mean, essentially what you're describing there is a rain problem. Our system can cope with the foul water that comes, but we've inherited a system that the Victorians designed, not just the Victorians, but engineers during the 19th century across the whole world built sewerage systems which combine rainwater and foul water. And so I think from the point of view of councillors and the council, we heard a little bit about porous paving and those sorts of systems which are about managing rain where it lands, rather than ducting it into a collection system that will gradually become overwhelmed, especially with urban development, with more and more paving over of what was previously soft areas and become hard standing. The more rain that enters the system, the more likely we are to see those kinds of events. We're investing a few $100 million over this current 5-year period to deal with this issue. And a lot of that will be additional storage within the network or additional storage at sewage treatment works, those sort of concrete solutions that I was talking about earlier. And all of that is necessary, but it's not sufficient on its own. So there needs to be a much more joined-up, integrated approach to managing rain. It's essentially what this all boils down to. I think the other nuance that I do want to mention is that when you look at rivers, there's a difference between rivers as a recreational amenity and rivers for their ecological condition. The biggest issue for the ecological condition of rivers is not storm overflows, is not overflows from the sewage system. It's phosphorus, and that comes from effluent that we receive and then treat. And then we, at Salford Sewage Treatment Works, the sewage that comes in has 10 milligrams per litre of phosphorus, 8 to 10 milligrams, and when it leaves it has about 1.5. And that level is tightening, and we treat the sewage to reduce that phosphorus in the effluent. But it's still the largest contributor to the river alongside agriculture and the runoff that you get from farmlands, from the entire Bristol-Avon catchment. When you think, you look upstream and the agricultural activity that happens. So those would be the sort of the two main inputs of phosphorus, and that is the main reason for the River Avon, most of its stretches not achieving good ecological status. I recommend the Environment Agency's Catchment Data Explorer. It's an excellent portal where you can look at individual river stretches and look at what are classified as the reasons for not achieving good status. And you'll see the whole breadth of pressures on any given river, and the outputs from wastewater treatment is one of them, but by far not the only one.
Thank you for that. I've got John and Duncan, but I'm sure there were other hands I might have missed. Oh, okay. You are? Jenny, yeah, fine. I've got you, Jenny. Okay, John?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with a statement, if I may, because it relates to your answer, and then I have some questions. I looked at the last, well, not some years ago, I looked at what were then the last 10 years' worth of Wessex Water annual statements, and if I recall correctly, the amount of money that was given in a dividend to your one shareholder rather exceeded the amount of money that was invested in the infrastructure. So my comment is I look forward to the day when the balance is shifted around and you actually spend less on dividends and more on infrastructure investment. I have some questions. I had a conversation, again, this is a couple of years ago, with a public-facing member of Wessex Water. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I can certainly find it in my records. But he was in an official capacity. This wasn't a casual side conversation in the pub or anything like that. And I asked him a number of questions which were again to do with the water, the foul water that gets put into our rivers. And obviously we understand the CWS, combined water system. And I talked about, well, what happens when there is heavy rain and some of the foul water goes straight into the river? He said it's all treated. And I got into a little bit more of a conversation about what treatment meant, and it turned out that treatment, actually just diluting the water, counted as treatment. Can I check, is that correct, that you consider the sewage treated as long as you've diluted it?
No, I would. Treatment is different to dilution. Yeah. So treatment is what happens at a sewage treatment works. If you're talking about a spill from the sewerage network upstream, sometimes there will be it will be the case that the sewage and the rain is sitting in a tank, and so you get some degree of settlement that occurs, and then what's discharging is a decanted flow, if you like. So you'll get a settled overflow. But that's not always the case, and eventually you get situations where prolonged rainfall is going straight through. The contrast would be at the sewage treatment works, where you'll have storm tanks that will be picking up a large quantity of the excess. And then again, when the flow to the storm tanks means that those are full, then you'll start to get a discharge. And you'd be very, very welcome to come to Saltford Sewage Works the next time we have an Open Doors Day, which I guess will probably be in September or October. You'll see the storm system there. And also the new capacity that's been built at Saltford, large capital programme over the last few years, and is, I think, just in the process of being commissioned. So that will be coming on stream very soon. But yeah, there is a difference between treatment that occurs at a treatment works, where it should be going through a few stages before the effluent goes to the environment and a spill. Of course, during very heavy rain, there is more flow going down the river, so there is a dilution effect that does occur. But that still doesn't mean that it's good enough, and that we're just happy for that system to persist as it is. Hence our focus on additional storage, reducing the frequency of overflows, doing more work in the catchment, working with builders or whoever.
Okay, another part of the conversation we did get on to the harm that's caused by the effluent flow into the river, and he claimed that the effluent flow was not causing any harm to the environment, provided it didn't actually make it worse. So, in that sense, it sort of accepted the current level of harm to the environment from the current level of effluent flow was the norm, and Wessex Water wasn't causing any harm if it didn't make it worse. Is that the thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is where the benchmarking or the thing that we refer to are the identified reasons for a river stretch not achieving good status. And there are only a few locations within our entire operating region where overflows from the sewage network are the principal reason for the river not achieving good status. And those are principally around the Trim in Bristol. There are a few places there. As I said, the main causes of ecological of a river not achieving it's the value that it could in ecological terms is principally nutrients.
Okay, and the third and final message I took away from this conversation, which I'd like to check if I've misunderstood, he said it's safe to swim in the river. He said it wasn't swimming in the river that made you unwell, it was swallowing some of the water that made you unwell, which I rather sort of drew an analogy, say, well, that's like saying it's safe to be in a room full of carbon monoxide as long as you don't breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, is that...
I wouldn't advocate swallowing the water in anything I was swimming in, whether it was public swimming baths or a river. And if a river had the same chemical composition or kind of level of cleanliness as a public swimming pool, there would be next to no ecology in that river. So whether it's a river at the top of a catchment above any settlement, I still don't think it's a good idea to be swallowing the water that you're swimming in. So it just seems to be common sense from my point of view.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. So we move on to Duncan.
I'll be very brief. It's not really a question. It's just to say, in Salford, there was a very good example of you installing, I think, for £1 million, a storage tank at the bottom of Bath Hill near the speed camera there. People don't even comment anymore on the sort of flooding that used to take place, and that's because that was so successful. So just thank you, and it's an example of you doing what you said you want to do.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Jenny, do you want to come to grab a microphone? Otherwise you won't be heard on the world, wide web and YouTube and all sorts.
Again, I see this as, like everything, as a shared responsibility. I didn't realise until recently that most drugs and chemicals cannot be removed by sewage treatment, and I hadn't thought about the impact of our downpipes and our driveways. Have you thought about sharing that more proactively with individuals? Thank you.
Yeah, on the latter point, it's something that we do stress in our customer communications, whether it's the magazine that we send out or general stuff on YouTube or social media or whatever. So it is something that we talk about a lot. And there's a certain amount that people can do at the level of individual households. But I guess the points where we can be most impactful is working with local authorities, with developers, etc., which probably is happening behind the scenes for most people. They won't be aware of those kinds of conversations that are happening. And yeah, learning from what other water companies are doing around the country on managing rain better. We do share information very actively as practitioners. The water companies are trying to learn best practice from each other. But yeah, on the first point around persistent chemicals and so on, yes, this is a live area of research in the water industry to understand the kind of the transport of pharmaceutical residues, etc., through the system, and ways in which those can be broken down, if at all. But yeah, it's an issue that we know is going to likely drive a lot of investment in the next 20 years or so. Yeah, we don't yet have limits, that's the thing. There aren't concentration limits within the parameters set by regulators, although that's starting to appear in the drinking water regulations, but not in the wastewater ones. Yeah, it is, but I mean, we also see that many things are already ubiquitous in the environment, so you can reduce the flow of the tap. But yeah, there's a lot out there already. I think we're well aware of that.
Okay, I've got one question. I work for BART as a volunteer, as a river detective.
Great.
And every month, I've been doing it for about 4 months, and every month I measure the River Chew as it goes through Cambridge Park. And every month, the scores I get for the two things I measure are nitrates 2, phosphates 0. Sounds like a dreadful football match, doesn't it? And you said earlier that phosphates were very dangerous, and you'd reduced the levels
they're the leading reason for rivers not achieving good status. Yeah.
Can you tell me what nitrates do, and well, can you tell me what both of them actually do to the river?
Yeah, sure. So both of them act as nutrients. They are fed upon by microbes, and during warm conditions you can get algal blooms forming because the algae have got a rich food source with nitrates and phosphorus within the water column. And sometimes it's also sitting there in the sediments and can become remobilized and enter the water in that way. And then when you get algal blooms, that strips dissolved oxygen from the water, which then means that other forms of life will die because you have a deoxygenated river. That's in the kind of the extreme situations, but that is the principal risk. So, the difference between phosphorus and nitrogen, so within the freshwater environment, phosphorus is the limiting nutrient, and nitrogen is generally the limiting nutrient in the marine environment. Although I think the science is, that's how the established science is generally distinguished between the two in terms of the nutrient properties. I think the view is that nitrogen and nitrates will have more of an impact in the freshwater environment, more of a contributor to eutrophication, this overfeeding, than would have been previously thought.
And what is, this is probably a stupid question, but we're told that we have to have stupid questions. So this is it. So what is a safe level of those two chemicals? Is it 0 or is there a tolerable sort of level?
Yeah, so those change over time. So I mentioned that the phosphorus limit at Salford certainly was 2 milligrams per litre in the past, and I think it's being tightened to 1. Warminster, at the top of the River Wylye, has had a limit of 1 milligram per litre, and that's being tightened down to half a milligram per litre. In practice, that means that we'll be discharging at 0.25 milligrams per litre in order to remain safely within the limit. It's all down to the volume of effluent that is going out into the river, the size of the river it's going into, so the scale of the receiving water, and how much dilution occurs of the treated effluent once it gets into the river itself. Generally, to achieve good ecological status, you're looking to get to, I think it's 0.1 milligrams per litre within the river. I might be out by a factor of 10. We'd need to check.
Phosphorus, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? Karen and then Saskia. Oh, just Karen, yeah? And Saskia, okay. And Eleanor, lovely. So, Karen, Saskia, Eleanor, and then we'll stop.
Thanks for your statement, Dan. You've mentioned water runoff, or this, actually not the water runoff, but the runoff from farms. Obviously, from a public perspective, they would say that you're not doing enough to work with farmers to help alleviate that. That's one part of my question. And why have you not diverted the overflow from going into rivers to other areas?
On the first one, we have been very active working with farmers, and we were the first company to start employing catchment advisors, farm advisors, and to the best of my knowledge, we're still one of the few that has a kind of a fully staffed up team doing work with farmers on exactly this issue. I think to a large degree it has to be said that we were gap filling, in the sense that other organisations which regulate the water environment and can regulate farmers were not doing that. And so we were somewhat stepping into the breach, because it's actually not one of our regulatory duties. So we were doing something that was not happening, especially in areas, firstly, where there was a direct risk to the water source that we were going to be using for public supply. But then more broadly, when we were looking at places like Poole Harbour, with nitrates coming from various different locations, does it make sense to invest further at a sewage treatment works where we're already reducing nitrogen, or to go up into the catchment and start working work more with farmers create incentives. We actually created a company called Entrade, which developed a market-based method for farmers and others to come forward with methods by which they could reduce nutrient inputs or create natural flood storage or reduce soil erosion and be paid for that by people, other organisations who are wanting to see those improvements occur. And we created this brokerage platform which would enable that to happen. So we've been very active in that area. On sewer overflows, I think the question is, how do you reduce those? You don't want to just point them at something else. They're usually at the bottom of a hill or in the lower lying part of a city or a town because the river works its way through the floodplain and the town is built up around it. So you wouldn't want to be just pumping overflow water back uphill somewhere and discharging it in some other locations. So you're either trying to store it in situ, which is the kind of tank building that you were talking about there, or increasing the capacity at the sewage works at the bottom of the drainage catchment, which is why we have enormous tanks at Salford, or you're trying to stop rain getting into the system in the first place. And if I've got time, I'd like to kind of just mention very briefly a couple of things that we do on that, because prevention is better than cure. So in many of the villages around Salisbury Plain, where you have high groundwater levels in the winter, the water table rises up. That water underground will find its way through any sort of gaps, the joints of a sewer pipe. So in some of these villages, we've been sealing the inside of the pipe to make it harder for the rain to get in. But that's the main sewer, which will run up and down the road. The water table is also very high in people's gardens, which act like a sponge, effectively, the pipes running from people's houses to the main sewer. And those are private pipes which belong to each property. And so those are gathering basically rainwater, or the water table water, and overwhelming the sewage treatment works. We do what we can in those locations at the sewage treatment site. So you'll have a tank, the water will flow into it, it'll settle, the decanted water at the top then goes into a reed bed at a place like Shrewton on Salisbury Plain, and then having gone through the reed bed, it then goes into the river. The official classification of that is dumping raw sewage. The effluent is cleaner than the river it is going into during those months. But the origin is essentially groundwater, mostly from people's homes. So we can do what we can do, sealing sewers in those sorts of locations, but whether it's through innovation or through kind of changing access rights or whatever, we need to be able to make people's private pipes less likely to gather in water themselves.
Okay, so there's final two questions. First, Saskia, and then Eleanor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring up that even though I find this really, really interesting, I'm very concerned that we are now reaching the end of our open session and we haven't even got to discussing the strategy.
Sorry.
It's not your mistake. I think I just wanted to point out that this topic is obviously of interest to a lot of people, as seen by all the public speakers, and we're now being left with like 5 minutes. And then we are moving to a closed session, which I do not agree with. I think it should be in the open. I think that this is a space for us to ask questions, and we have been elected to be here in this room, and I think the public should be...
Yeah, we don't have to stop at 12, Saskia. We will carry on.
It's an open session.
Well, we're not quite at the open session yet, but we will carry on doing the next part with the questions and answers.
Great.
And probably finish then, I imagine, given the time. Okay? So we now move on to...
Thank you very much. I found the description of the drainage very interesting, because that's basically the situation in Radstock. and I'm glad that the Environmental Agency are checking the purity of the streams that flow through the town on a very regular basis. But I wanted to know what plans there were for the Radstock sewage plant in Mill Road, which takes the Pisa and St John effluent, by the way. And secondly, the issue with the Miners Brook, which is near my house, there's water coming out of the mines, and I was wondering what plans, how you dealt with all this water that comes up out of the mines, and whether you would be interested in or have any part in the aspirations of both the town councils to have heat generation from the mines, or the mine water. Is that feasible?
Yeah.
I believe mine water discharges are, it's the Environment Agency that would be, would have some sort of ability to act on that. So that would exist outside of the assets that Wessex Water operates, I believe, in just about every case. If it's the case that it's the mine water going straight into a local stream or okay, yes. So yes, that would be definitely a matter for the Environment Agency. On Radstock Sewage Treatment Works, if I may, I'll take that back to a colleague to get you a complete answer. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I can certainly find out.
Yeah, that's fine. You send it to the officers. You send your reply to the officers or to me, and I'll make sure it gets to Anna.
All right, thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much, Dan, for coming in and for being honest with your answers and clear, which is always a blessing. We often have politicians and not always as clear as that. So thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you again for the invitation.
Right, so we move on to the next section, which is to examine the people-focused elements of the climate and nature strategy. And I hand back to Sarah.
Fiona Powell, who's going to give a presentation, I think. Fiona Powell is going to give a presentation now of the policy development elements.
Thank you.
Will you stop at each question section? Brilliant.
Yes,
okay.
I will. And just to ask that the slides could come back up onto the screens as well, so that we can follow. Please. Just to say, it's not good broadcast. The sound isn't working. Okay. Could I also say that we've had a message saying the sound is not working on the webcast for two colleagues that are joining us online. So I don't know if that's something else that could be looked at.
Okay, well, he seems to think it's working, but let's just move on.
Yeah, no, I would just, if I can have the slides back up that... Thank you. I will start speaking because the first bit is the agenda. So we've broken down this session into 3 sections. The first is to ask for your feedback based on the paper that was published last week on the outline of the climate and nature strategy draft that we have been working on. And specifically, there are 3 questions that were in the paper around the sources that we have used, the outline of the document and the actual strategy itself, as well as the next level of detail of the contents, i.e. the framework for that strategy. And then the next section is to look in more detail at the people-focused elements of the strategy, namely looking at how we empower businesses and communities, enable the right jobs and skills, and that support those most vulnerable in our communities during and beyond the current transitions. Should time allow, we have one further recent publication from Bristol City Council and their Climate Action Plan, which is a single slide, an excerpt from their What Can I Do chapter, and we would really like to seek the Powell's views on that. And so just to set the context with one slide, and as a reminder for those who might not be as close to the work that we are bringing forward today, we are bringing forward the outline of a combined climate and nature strategy for North Bath and North East Somerset. That has regard for both what the Council needs to deliver, enable and convene, and also how we tackle the climate and ecological emergencies as a district. It sits within a framework of two other council strategies, key ones, the health and wellbeing strategy and also our economic strategy. And at a regional level, it also feeds to and from strategies and plans such as the recently published growth strategy from 2025 and the climate and ecological emergency strategy and action plan from 2023 and the local nature recovery strategy from 2024. Just sitting below that is a large number of council strategies and plans that cover the range of topics that we see within the strategy framework, but I just wanted to highlight today the Greener Places plan that was recently published and was mentioned in the Councillor McCabe's presentation to us. And we are conscious that the Council has a key role to play to enable progress across and towards the emergencies, but we absolutely rely on partnership working for successful delivery, for example, from our Future Ambition Board civic partners, and the many climate and nature groups working already within the district, as well as established regional partnerships such as the West of England Nature Partnership and also the Bristol Avon Catchment Partnership, for example. And just on the right-hand side, as a reminder, is from the Climate Change Committee's report into how local authorities can work and the spheres of influence that they have. And of course, there are things that were in our direct control, but also other ways that we must act with here, decreasing spheres of influence, but that is the subject of our conversation today, really to understand where our focus can best lie. Just to bring out two slides, or two bits from the first question before we ask for your feedback on the sources. Here we have from the paper, the list of sources that the officer team has used to date. I noted that the public speaker earlier mentioned the recent publication on the biodiversity and the sort of ecological system collapse, and absolutely we have got that within our team's awareness, and I will add that in. But here we have a combination of good practice templates, for example, the Lewis Council Climate and Nature Strategy and the Newham Council Climate Transition Plan, they have a Just Transition Plan, sort of recommended by the Local Government Association, UK 100 and Friends of the Earth, and then a range of ways that we are held to account, for example, the Climate Action Scorecard that sets out how we as councils should be tested against our other councils of a similar size and so on. We have a number of national reports and, for example, the climate change risk assessment process. We have future forecasts from a weather perspective from the Met Office. And then we have a number of ways and approaches to look at the sort of the just transition, be that from the City of Bristol's Just Transition Declaration through to aspects of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and so on. Finally, as I've mentioned already, we have our existing strategies and plans, and those are the West of England. And the final piece that's within the paper that I just wanted to draw out in the slides this morning is a combination of two pieces of work that we did last year. Firstly, a resident survey where 833 residents responded to tell us what mattered to them for the climate and ecological emergencies and how we should tackle them. And also a BAME's Climate and Nature network that held a first meeting in November last year, where we had 171 participants across the many active groups and businesses acting for climate and nature within our district. And we can see here the things that they told us mattered to them. And at the top, we have in common how we travel, the food we eat, how we improve our buildings and the land we use locally,
how we prepare for climate change, 2/3 of the way down, was more of a gap between the two in terms of their percentage responses, but clearly very important for both groups. And then towards the bottom, you can see that for residents, the energy we use and also waters and rivers were very, very important for those resident responders, and climate justice and empowering communities and businesses to take action was of critical importance to those organisations acting in this way within our communities. So those are my introductory slides, and then Councillor Waite, if you'd like to, we would really welcome your feedback on that as a series of sources.
So this is where we mark the homework. So the first one is, are there any further sources that officers should consider to cross-reference against the draft strategy outline? Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make on that? Duncan?
Just briefly, in case I missed it, there was nothing listed about the Canal and River Trust. We've got a river going, canals, going through our area. Do they have a policy that might be worth looking at?
I will certainly have a look and see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's also Bath and Avon River Trust, which is another similar group. They're a bunch of volunteers. They're really good. I mean, they're the ones that I work with, as I mentioned earlier. Are there any other questions on this? Yes, Saskia?
Yeah, you mentioned like our own internal strategies. So I was thinking, obviously, once the movement strategy and the air quality strategy have been finalised, those would be key internal strategies.
3.4, you mentioned the review combined with views of residents and community groups. Community groups, in Peasdown, I'm a part of a community trust where we do send out surveys to our residents. I don't think you've engaged with us, so I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, I'd like to make a wider observation, if I may. It's about legislation, in the sense that I'm thinking of the rights of rivers legislation and other nature conservation or protection orders. I'm a bit of an old cynic, and often if there's legislation, magically things happen. So I think it might be worth looking at various bits of legislation that are going on in other areas that we might want to adopt in Baines. Anybody else? Eleanor?
Well, as I said to full council, there's no point in any of this and of us sitting here unless individual people take responsibility, stop idling their cars outside schools, for example. If we could get proper monitoring of the impact of taking your child to school by car in certain areas, all these kinds of things. And we've now had a Cumbrian sycamore incident in Hayden in Radstock. How did we fail to get the message through about the importance of trees? And so if we could just have some policy to make every single Baines resident more responsible, and I'll include myself, I think that would be a good idea.
I think we all get very annoyed with running sort of engines in stationary vehicles. That really annoys me, I have to say. But that's anybody else got any? Yes, John.
I fail to see how that's part of question 1. I mean, that might be part of question 2 when we get on to that. But aren't we dealing with the questions in order?
You make a good point, John. Thank you. Yeah, but it's not an agency we want to work with, is it? So, Ollie.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to again commend the work that's been done so far. I thought it might be worth just reflecting on one of the earlier public speakers about the link with health and whether there are some additional health sources. For example, the Wellcome Trust was mentioned earlier. That could be a good one to look at.
Thanks. That's good.
There's the recent Bristol Health Declaration, which is by public health officials. It's nothing to do with Bristol, it's a national one, but yeah, that would be a key one to look at.
More hands, so back to you.
Thank you. There's only one slide here before the second question, which is that as a result of the input and the frameworks that we've used to date, we've developed this draft outline for the strategy in which you can see what we would, as a council, need to deliver, enable and influence across Bath and North East Somerset. driving towards outcomes which would be net zero, nature positive and climate resilient as a district. You can see in either light blue or sort of ringed what is a new topic versus the combination of the climate strategy of 2019 and the 2023 ecological emergency action plan. And we have sought to use, in this case, the Lewis outline and framework, which was held up by Friends of the Earth as good practice to start us in our thinking. I would really welcome feedback from the panel as to whether this captures the right breadth of topics and content within the strategy outline.
Okay. John?
Thank you. And I think this is maybe where Eleanor's comment comes in. In the blue bits, the light blue bits there, we have 8 areas where we are developing themes, particular focus. So, how do we improve outcomes on energy, travel, food, economy, and so forth? I'd like to see one on the attitudes of businesses and residents, and cultural change, bringing about the change in the narratives that people have. So that, I mean, to pick up on Eleanor's point there, it's about mindset, it's about the way people go about their daily lives and the things they think of. There should be, I won't say naming and shaming, but there should be pressure to help people to think. I don't want to be idling if I'm just sitting here waiting for my child for 10 minutes. There's a lot of promotion of foreign holidays as if it's everybody should have a foreign holiday. Hey, why not have 2? You're somehow falling behind if you don't have 2 foreign holidays. I mean, we need to change the culture around how people just do their daily things and the narratives that feed the consumerist culture that we have. We're not going to change it overnight, but we need to start to lean much more radically away from some of the things that have been the source of the problems that we've had.
Okay, Sarah?
Ursula Leach, what you think the role for the council is in that? It's a very interesting point.
Yeah, I'd like to see a discussion, a strategy about how that this is something to focus on, that it is an important aspect along with the other ones that are up there. And then we can start to talk about, obviously the council does have an ability to influence, has a lot of communications, it has a lot of interaction with businesses. So we have our anchor institutions. I think there's a lot of work that we can do talking with our anchor institutions to help encourage them to be more sustainable and to change the approaches that they have with their, whether it's the customers they serve, the students that they serve, and so forth. I'm happy to have a wider discussion.
Okay, any other points? Yes, Hal?
So what I keep thinking about is if you're bringing nature into a research program, it seems to me that you're bringing something which is really symptoms or consequences, whereas if you work on the CO2, you're working on the cause. And what worries me is that by just bringing them all together, perhaps we're going to be giving too much weight to the ecology, because it is very clear to me that we should be working on the carbon dioxide. So I believe, in a sense, that if you're going to bring the nature in, then I would like to see a proper plan to get to net zero. And if that plan is put in front of me, then I would be happy to start funding the nature stuff. But I'm worried that by bringing it all together, you're going to end up working on less significant things.
I don't know if I've understood correctly, Hal, but is it that you're thinking that nature is less significant of a problem than carbon dioxide. So if I could respond to that, I mean, we as a council, you might remember in 2020, I think it was, we declared an ecological emergency. I think so although we only showed you, from the National Emergency Briefing, we only showed you clips that focused essentially on climate, there was a whole presentation in that meeting from Professor of Ecology, probably was, I think, they were mostly professors who were presenting, about the ecological crisis. So I suppose my response is that nature is also in crisis, and nature is really important to us. So if you think about the food that we eat, a lot of it, I don't know, is it 30 or 40% arises from pollination, and so if our pollinators die, then in fact that's very, very big implications for the food chain, and also that there are relationships between the two, so that whilst nature is impacted by lots of things, I mean, pollution, air pollution, water pollution, insecticides, pesticides, herbicides and so on. It's impacted by lots of things, but it is also impacted by the climate, and also part of the solutions to the climate come through nature-based solutions. So some of what we've heard about from some of our speakers today and from what Dan's work with Wessex Water, there are nature-based solutions whereby if you do the right things to encourage the right type of nature, nature can actually help us with this problem. It can actually sequester carbon. So I suppose, I think the balance of science is now that they are both extremely significant and interlinked problems that both have the potential to disrupt life on the planet as we know it. So that's the reason why we're proposing to bring them together and to consider them jointly in a way as one interlinked problem at this point.
May I just come back? It's just that it's so clear that CO2 is the cause of our problem. And all I've said is, if you had a properly detailed map of things you're going to do and achieve to get to net zero, then I absolutely agree that you can start to bring the ecology into it. But until you've shown me that, I'm worried that the programme is not going to be optimum.
Respond again just to say, I mean, so acting as a council alone, I think it's going to be, you know, given what we've said about the constraints on councils' powers, for example, government is constraining our powers to require net zero new building of net zero new build houses, which is the obvious thing to do. So there are ways in which we don't have the powers, and we're not able to completely transform as a unitary authority our whole transport system, so move it away from fossil fuels. So we don't have the ability. So I think to produce, I mean, we are working, you know, we have in the past produced various forms of pathways and action plans that indicate the steps we will have to take towards net zero. But I think to give a fully sort of timelined and, you know, costed action plan that, you know, project plan that takes us to net zero as a council would be an exceptionally hard thing to do at this time. And I don't know, you know, how we could do that. And I think it's not right to put off action on nature until we can get to that point. So I'm going to have to, I think, I mean, your point is really interesting, and it really, for me, it informs the communication we need to do with our residents, because it's really relevant to have heard that point and to have heard your thoughts about that. But I think it's important, I mean, others in the room no doubt will have a view, but I think it's important that we progress both of the pathways in tandem and side by side.
Okay, so we've got 3 more questions. So can you keep them brief, otherwise we'll, you know, I'm thinking about tea now rather than lunch. Along the line, John, Saskia, Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to see something in that diagram that talks about the overarching priorities, and maybe it would fit in the cross-cutting focuses bit. And I have 2 overarching priorities that I'm thinking about immediately. One of them is the balance between resilient building and reducing carbon emissions. So I understand what Hal has said there, but to my mind, historically, we focused primarily on reducing our emissions. I think that adaptation as it was, building resilience as we refer to it now, was sort of the sort of younger sibling. I think that needs to be the other way around. I think that it doesn't matter whether we get to net zero tomorrow across the whole of the district. We are going to be suffering by the middle of the century, 3/4 of the way into the century, we are going to be suffering a complete catastrophe. I think that needs to be the focus, not to stop focusing on the contributions we can make to reducing our emissions, but we need to focus much more strongly, I think, on adaptation and resilience building. So I'd see that as a overarching priority, and it would be nice to see in there. Another one I have in mind is that, to my mind, the catastrophe is a systemic problem. It's not about individual people not recycling enough or not stopping idling. It's a systemic problem. I mean, the whole economy has been marinated in fossil fuels for so very long. Again, I'd like to see less of a focus on what the small things that individuals can do, but start to look much more at the consumption, for example, of soft plastics by industry at large. I mean, we've all looked at Mr. Wallace's, what is it, In the Factory. And I remember in pretty much all of those, whenever there's product coming out of the warehouse on a pallet, it's wrapped in miles and miles and miles of plastic before it goes onto the truck. I mean, I don't know how many individual people using their saran wrap or cling film or whatever that's the equivalent to. But it seems to me if we were to look at the more systemic or maybe the larger scale side ends of the problem, that, again, will be an overarching priority I'd like to see supported throughout. Thank you.
Yeah, good points, John. Saskia?
Thank you, Chair. To come back to Hal's comment about nature, I agree with you, Sarah, that they are interlinked and we need to work very hard on both of them. And I think we need to look at, I'm very interested in the co-benefits section there, so I think we need to deliver for people while acting on the climate and ecological emergency. So, for example, we can, if we have better insulated homes, then people's bills are going to lower, and that's what we need to do at the moment. And I wanted to point out that I think we need to focus, we need to have it clear in the strategy what we have control over locally. So we obviously all want our rivers to be clean, but we need government to nationalise water companies, and that's not really looking very good. So I guess I just want to say that I want us to focus on what we do have control over. One of those areas is transport, I think, and I think in transport we are really lacking progress, and especially like seeing how we are doing. I think we're lacking the data in that aspect. So I guess I would like to see in the draft outline more focus on what we do have the most influence over, together with delivering for local people.
Duncan.
Right, 2 points. One under enablers, and you've got empowering communities. What's really important with that is that there's knowledge, and the public have access to that knowledge. I can't remember the source, but there was a website where you could click on a place like Salford, and it showed the carbon emissions in 2 ways. They included people using the roads through, sort of transitory, but also the footprint of people that actually live there. And I compared that with other villages in my ward, and I was really struck with how Salford was not a good example of reducing carbon emissions, presumably because it's an affluent place and people are flying off, etc., all the time. So people need to have that knowledge, and it maybe even at a very localized level, like a village, so people are told this or explained, this is the situation. And people are helped to make the decisions. If they had the knowledge, they might make the decisions that would help. There's also a second point, that this is all based on people, once they have that knowledge, feeling altruistic. Now, everybody in this room, given the knowledge, would want to be altruistic, make the planet better. But there are a lot of people out there who say, what's the point when China's doing X, Y, Z? Or I'm not bothered, what's in it for me? So we ought, as well as appealing to people's altruism, we do need to appeal to their pocket. So, for example, we say that if you do these things, your energy bills will be lower. People think, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So we need to be a bit hard-headed and not just altruistic.
Just a quick one. I'm very keen on communities having their input in this document and knowing what we're doing is coming, because like the document that we were showing earlier, actually it was in the pre-meeting, I didn't know anything about. I know I wasn't on the council when it was produced, but I didn't know. So I don't know, is there any way that we could actually do almost like some sort of local, not citizens' assembly, but something like that, where we can actually get the communities involved in formulating this document, so then we can impact like what is Midston, Norton, Radstock thinking compared to Keynsham, Chew Valley, and even different parts of Bath. Like, I think it'd be really good if we could get the communities involved, and especially like Climate Hub were here earlier, like people who understand it just as much as just normal people as well. That's all I really want to say, really.
Yeah, the document Alex was talking about is yours, one of your documents. You may recognise it. It's the Bath and North East Somerset Ecological Emergency Action Plan, which is one of the prerequisites of this activity. So the thing that slightly worried Alex and me was that the town council, which was a meeting it came up at, didn't know anything about it. So I think he makes a good point, that we need to communicate better with our parish and town councils and other communities. My point, if I may make one, if I get the chance, is that I think there should be some recognition of the threats that face our communities going forward. We're looking for solutions, but there's also more potential negativity down the line. And the one that comes to mind straight away is the way the government changed the legislation on the local plan, which made it very difficult for Baines to work with what they'd done before. So government legislation, I suggest, could be a threat. It could obviously be a benefit, but the concept of a threat is quite important. And to give you one more example, in Keynsham, as everybody knows or should do, the population, the number of houses built since 2011 has gone up by 50%, and in that case, in those parts of the town where it's worse, there have been significant infrastructure collapses. For example, in July last year, there were 3 major burst water mains in Keynsham, caused by the extra housing, I assume, and the fact that people were using more water because it was very hot in July. And also power cuts are now a much more regular feature of our town. So these things need to be recognised as part of changes that are going to occur, and we need to be aware not only of the good things we're doing, but the bad things that may come along as we go. John, did you have a point? We'll make yours the last one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to pick up on Duncan's point there under the empowering communities and the importance of raising awareness, providing education and information, and providing the understanding that goes with that. And obviously that's one thing that the Climate Hub focuses on, if I can just take that little reference in there. Duncan spoke about trying to move on from altruism. And I absolutely agree with that. Normally you then think, okay, well, what do people care about? They care about their wallet, and therefore you look at appealing to people's pocketbook and coming up with ways to make affordability aligned with sustainability. There is one other thing that people care about, if not more than their wallet, and that's their children and their grandchildren. And I think one of the things, again, at the Climate Hub we've done is engage with people. What do you imagine the world will look like when your children are your age, when your grandchildren are your age? And that's where you start to get beyond the altruism and, what's the point? People get very, very engaged. that, that thread. So I don't know where that fits in. Maybe that fits in as we head down into more detail in the empowering communities bit. But again, it's not just pocketbook, which obviously the council doesn't have very many ways to appeal to people's wallets.
Okay. Ollie, last word, as you're in the cabinet.
Seriously, I mean, we've talked a lot about new builds, new communities.
Sorry, Eleanor, I said Ollie.
Sorry?
I said Ollie, not you.
Oh, but...
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to respond on the point that Alex raised about the community engagement side. I think that is absolutely crucial, and as Fiona did outline before, there has been that very broad survey. There was recently this Climate and Nature Network meeting here in the Guildhall, and the idea with that was to bring together many of the different community groups, and I think it's important that we work with all the different councillors and that all of those community groups that are active across the whole of Bath and North East Somerset feel part of that conversation. And as Alex pointed out, I think there's a real opportunity for further engagement as this process develops. And one of the things we're exploring with the Climate Hub, for example, and others, is making use of this national emergency briefing material to actually screen those with communities across the whole district as well. So a lot more opportunities coming up.
Just one thing that I think we will do is that these question sessions are really important, so we're going to send the questions to you after the meeting, because as you go home, you may suddenly think, oh, I wish I'd have thought of that at the meeting. So you'll have the opportunity to feed in further comments on the questions electronically after the meeting. But I mustn't forget, Eleanor, yeah.
Just going to say, we've got a lot here that's valuable for new communities, new developments, new ways of doing things. But we're a World Heritage Site. Can we try and evolve a chapter on how to deal with the historic buildings and the impact of, well, just take solar panels for one thing? Could that be done as well?
Yes, indeed. I think that's a very good idea. There are other old buildings outside Bath, as I'm sure you know, Eleanor. Right, so we move on to the next section. So I'm going to hand back to Fiona, who's going to carry on, I hope.
So there are two more, three including the Bristol Climate Action Plan, but two more areas we just wanted to touch on, and this is the last one within this outline section, and that's to look really at the content framework that we're using to develop the strategy. And you'll have seen in the papers that we provided last week that we are using a framework that we have 4 parts to. I must acknowledge at this stage that the New and Just Transition Plan was a key starting point for this work for us, which is a transition plan, which is in effect their climate action plan that they have focused on from a just transition perspective. But what it doesn't do is include nature, and so we've blended these things together. But fundamentally, we have a series of principles that underpin the strategy, a series of futures and future statements. And I understand that Climate Hub, of course, is an organisation, for example, that's working in a similar space at the moment on that topic. The big shifts that we will need to deliver those futures, and also the enablers that will help us get there. And so just to take you through just the content from the papers at that very high level before we ask for feedback, the principles here you see are 6, and that they are namely to restore nature, reduce emissions, reduce the risk, particularly from a resilience and adaptation perspective, and also to increase equity. Feedback from our climate and nature groups that we've worked with so far has said that support for local delivery is really key, and that has become sort of an underpinning principle in order to build long-term resilience. The next level down, if you like, within that is what are the futures that we want to see. And here you have 10 statements that we would love to have feedback on as to whether these are the future state, the future places that we want to create and live in. And they go from buildings to power to transport, the waste, the resources and waste that we use, and also our food, what we choose to eat, and also from a health perspective, how we connect our neighbourhoods, and making sure that our local economy is also resilient but connected and green at the same time. That we have from a wildlife perspective, wildlife is thriving, and our rivers and streams are clean and full of life. And then really underpinning that is that we are resilient, therefore, to the impacts of the already changing climate, including increased flooding, heat, in extreme heat and drought. And we are very conscious of the changing context in which we are living and working. And therefore, not just how we live and work ourselves within North and North East Somerset, but how what we do and how we live reduces the impacts we have beyond our own borders as a district, be that to regional, national and clearly international level. In order to deliver these futures, there are big shifts that we have identified that would help support these transitions, and they fundamentally, they're here on the screen, but have much to do with electrification, of course, from a climate perspective, but also how we will need to become increasingly resilient and efficient with our resources, how we are becoming more used to sharing and lowering our own consumptions as a community, and how our local economy will also become more resilient and shift towards lower impact supply chains and activities and so on. Travel, I know, is such a big important topic for a whole host of co-joining reasons. And in addition to electrifying travel, it is also incredibly important that we are developing places that reduce the need for us to actually use our cars, for example, in the first place. And therefore, the new infrastructure that is coming forward needs to be both contributing to climate resilience, but also to supporting better public transport, active travel, and nature recovery at the same time. The sort of water and rivers and land use and management statements here are about significantly reducing pollution into our waters and rivers and streams, and then to the points that Dan was making, the need to slow the flow of water through the landscape, so that we are using nature-based solutions in order to slow that flow of water through our landscape and reduce consumption. Finally, on land use and management, I need to acknowledge, of course, that the land use framework has recently been published in the last week, and that document sets out, sort of in a long-awaited way, a framework in which development and housing development should sit within the wider use of land. And we are just processing that ourselves in terms of what it says and sets out. But we, of course, need to use our land more smartly and efficiently to create space for nature and adapt to changing climate, but also providing sustainable food security. And therefore, how we adapt and use our land is really key for building our local resilience. Finally, from an enabler's perspective, boldness would be a word, certainly from the Westminster emergency briefing videos that we started with today. And we acknowledge that we do need to, of course, increase investment, but that will also need to be through innovative partnerships as well as national support. It remains a non-statutory area for local authorities at the moment, which does limit the investment that we have from our current budgets. However, we did hear from BWC this morning, of course, as an example of that. We need to partner with our anchor institutions to drive through delivery, as already comments from councillors today. And we need to enable that in individual, community, civic and place-based action through and throughout our communities, and that needs to happen in different ways depending on the place and the communities involved. We do need to, of course, collaborate beyond our borders, but retain that principle of support for local delivery. And we need to also grow our district's climate and nature action capacity and effectiveness, and that would be both as a council, of course, but also amongst all of us, and to the points made about knowledge leading to action within communities. We do need to focus on nature-based solutions that deliver for both climate and nature, for reasons that Councillor Warren described shortly ago. And it is of critical importance for us from an enabling perspective that we focus on enabling the right jobs and skills. And we have that section in the final section of this discussion today, the very wide-ranging number of jobs and skills that we need to make sure are present within our communities. Chair.
Okay, so we come to the second section of questions. So there are two questions there, so we'll take them one at a time. Does the above framework capture the feedback that the panel wishes to receive as elected members, and what is needed to deliver long-term resilience in Bath and North East Somerset in which everyone thrives? Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make on that?
Thank you. Over the last 50 years, a lot of things have changed. I can remember being a small child and everything was in the village that I lived in, the butchers, the baker, everything. But things have changed over time and the world's evolved greatly. It'd be great to see some of those things come back to our villages so that people can shop more locally, not have to travel. I think part of looking forward to the local plan, when we're looking at developing business areas, it shouldn't just be for offices. It should be for bigger things so people can walk and cycle to those areas. I think I wanted to touch on something that John said about trees. Over the last few years in Peasdown, we've planted many, many trees, but we need more education to younger people that they are for their future. They're not to be ripped down as a joke or anything, because that's what all this is about, isn't it? It's the long-term effects for everybody, you know, and we are only here for a very short time, and we need to do the most for what we've got.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody else wish to say anything? Saskia?
Thank you. Yeah, particularly that first question. I guess I wanted to point out that people always ask me about safer streets. So that would be the main thing for me, as in people need to feel safe to move around, walking and cycling and wheeling, and they currently do not, and they do not feel safe actively travelling when it's dark, for example. And I wanted to come back on the electrifying travel. I guess what we always hear is about reliability and affordability of buses, not necessarily electrification. I think everyone supports that, and that's obviously in the making with First Bus having a new depot in Bath. But I guess, so my question was about the big shifts. We need to electrify travel. I would like to point out that it is really important that we support people in the transition to EVs, but it is more important and more pressing that we enable people to walk, wheel and cycle so that they can actually make that choice to do that. Well, currently it's not even on people's minds because it's just not seen as an option for many.
Okay, so I'm looking at question 1 at the moment. We'll come to question 2 shortly. The other thing I would like to comment on is essentially carrying on from Karen's point, the high streets. I mean, the high streets, I think, are a totally different institution than they were even 20 years ago because of the advent of the internet, essentially. And the other thing, which I think has become much more obvious in many high streets, and that is the concept of sort of second-hand charity-type shops. And it seems to me that that's actually a very positive thing, because it's amazing the sort of things you can find in these second-hand and charity shops, which you think to yourself, well, why on earth would anyone throw that away? And so we have a situation where we live in a society which has wealth enough to throw away stuff that is really valuable. So we need to reuse our stuff and perhaps remove the stigma of going to these places, because it's good for the planet if we use stuff that other people don't really want, and we can find a use for them. So I think that's the way the high street's going to go, maybe with more entertainment venues within it as well. And we need our high streets for social and mental health reasons, for our communications and enjoyment. Anything else? Or shall I move on to question 2? Okay, let's move on to question 2. So question 2 is about recommendations and feedback from the panel to improve this framework. So John?
Thank you, Chair. If we could go back a couple of slides to the shifts. That's the one there. So if I look at the strategy outline, you've got 8 chapters. Here you have 7 of them, but you don't have the 8th. And to my mind, the one that's missing is the economy, but I think of it in terms of practices within the economy rather than the built environment aspect of the economy. And again, it touches on the use of single-use plastics within commerce, the use of polystyrene packaging rather than cardboard, and those sorts of things. So I'd like to see a shift under that sort of the economy and the practices which are prevalent within our local economy.
Thank you, John. Anything from anybody else? So I've got two things I'd like to say as ways of improving. I didn't see much about a more plant-based diet within your details. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a vegan, but I think there's a lot of logic to eating less meat, for example, and possibly that's something we should be looking at. And the other one, you talked about at some point reducing flooding within the strategy, and it crosses my mind that the creation of wetlands would be a way of reducing river flow and stopping floods. And there are places that I can think of where such a thing would be very desirable in terms of along the River Avon in various places. That's all from me. John and Saskia, oh dear, oh, and Hal, they're all, I've woken them up now. That's a mistake. Go on then, John,
if I
Saskia.
pick up on your comment there about food, I mean, if I look at the shifts under food, the words you have there are not a shift. So maybe if we can rethink that a little bit and think of what those shifts are, and I would agree that we should shift towards more plant-based, less animal-based food as a shift, and more regenerative growing methods, I think would again be a useful shift under the food column there.
Saskia?
I wanted to come back to a point that I made earlier about I think we need to look at the intersection of viability, funding, delivering for residents' health outcomes on top of the climate and nature emergency. So I think when I look at these big shifts and the themes, I think like food is obviously, that needs to happen, but I'm thinking what can we do as a local authority to do about that? I think there are other areas where we can have much more influence and impact rather than food, for example, or, well, I think we need to look at the areas where we can actually have impact with the resources that we have.
Mind you, there is always the onion plan. I'll let that go because you look a bit confused. Somebody else, Hal, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, when I look at these, I go back to my previous and say there must be a few of these, and I think it probably links to your point. If I was spending money, I wouldn't be spending money in each of these boxes. I would be looking at where I can have a big impact and spend my money there. And by the way, the rest of the world is saying that a big future is going to be artificial intelligence. I don't see that working here. Clearly, the rest of the world can't be wrong. So, I don't know. I think this needs a little bit more work.
Thank you, Helen. Karen?
So I just wanted to talk about food waste, really. I think more education is needed. I don't think we need the use for food recycling bins because food can be reused. You know, just because you haven't eaten it on one day, it doesn't mean it can't be reused or frozen in another way. I mean, I get quite a lot of vegetables given to me on a Friday. My son goes to these places. I partly cook it, I freeze it, I use it for later. It's not wasted. So I think more education is needed in food waste.
John?
I might respond to Hal's comment there, where he said that the rest of the world can't be wrong. The rest of the world can be wrong. I mean, that's why we are facing a climate and environmental catastrophe.
Well, to be fair, I think the whole world's wrong on that one, but yeah, you're right.
Yes, this is now... Sorry, just making sure my laptop doesn't run out of power. The section we have now is the last ones from the paper, and that is about delivering for the community and resident-focused aspects of the draft outline. And so I've just pulled together 3 slides here that bring content from the paper itself to stimulate the discussion. The first is empowering our communities, and that is to go even further, because there is a strong recognition, of course, that we have long-standing, highly motivated communities which are active for climate, nature, adaptation in their local places, as well as long-term resilience, and who want to go further. We can see on the right-hand side here, this is from the paper, the top actions from our survey that residents have taken over the last 5 years and the actions that they would like to take. And what we can see is that there is already strong use of carrying reusables, the types of plants that are planted, repairing broken items and so on. However, the areas where there is less action are often to do with cost of implementation. And we can see that there is a real desire to make home efficiency improvements and that they want to do them but haven't necessarily had the opportunity to do so. We have also had broad feedback within the strategy development process from resident communities saying that actually having places and ways to come together locally is of critical importance so that they can coordinate action for climate and nature, but of course more broadly to build community in their own place. And I just wanted to highlight to the meeting that we have 2 local communities taking part in Bristol Climate and Nature Partnerships Community Climate and Nature Action Project, so sorry that's such a long one, which is supporting 2 communities here, Twerton and Whiteway Community Network, and also Bathmind, to work with their own communities to develop their own climate and nature action plans. And we are really, really looking forward to understanding how these communities find this process and to learning from it with a view to scaling. Enabling the right jobs and skills of critical importance. The paper recognises that there is a need for a clear definition of green skills and what that is, to make sure that all of the valuable jobs and skills that support delivering for the emergencies are visible and supported. And it will be important for us to identify and make sure we're clear on those so that we have the pathways for people to take part. Our business support is both ourselves as Baines, but also through the West of England Combined Authority. And there is a range of ways in which we support businesses already, and the strategy will explore how best to support and amplify that. For example, from carbon surveys to green business grants, the Retrofit West programme, and also there are resources available for businesses via the West of England's website. And we ourselves as a council will continue to work with organisations that represent our business community, including both via the Future Ambition Board that includes Bath Bid and Business West and other business organisations. Finally, and it isn't finally, I'm so sorry to use that word, but this is the final slide, sorry. It is of critical importance within the strategy, as we've discussed today, to support the most vulnerable during and beyond the current transitions. And as we work to develop the strategy, we would really welcome your feedback as to the approach that we're taking, which is that we recognise that the climate impacts can affect anyone, but of course certain groups have more potential to be affected than others. And we're working with a sort of a framework that you can see here from the Local Climate Adaptation Tool, LCAT, that looks and takes into account the various hazards, the exposure to those hazards and the vulnerabilities of the groups that are impacted in that Venn diagram of risk. And we recognise that climate risk intersects with existing health and social inequalities, and the people and groups that experience multiple inequalities are often the most vulnerable and exposed. We also understand that disadvantaged groups contribute least to causing climate change and yet are likely to be the most affected, and they are underrepresented often in decision making. It's of real importance to us that we work with those communities that we've identified in our EQIA, which we have published on our website this week, and look forward to hearing from these voices within our strategy development process, but would also welcome your thoughts and views today on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, just remember that we are going to recirculate the materials if you think of stuff later on or you think the meeting should finish. And I think the meeting should finish quite soon. But there are 3 categories here: empowering communities and businesses. So does anyone have anything to say on that? Okay, well, I've got one thing, and it's a little anecdote. I was litter picking with my youth council on Sunday, and at the end of it we thought we'd go to this Keynsham recycling centre to put the, because we'd actually separated the litter into sort of cans and non-cans and bottles, And when we got there, there were 61 people in the queue to get into the recycling centre. So my suggestion is that if we are to be serious about waste management, I mean, Keynsham Recycling Centre is like a gold standard thing, and that has many, many ways of isolating useful products from our waste. We really need to think about more recycling centres, which I know is a difficult one because we're slightly sort of behind, but it would help, I think, to create a healthier society, especially at the Keynsham. You know, they recycle, they use the electric off the roof for the electricity to be used in their refuse trucks and so on. That's all I've got. If not, we'll move on to question 2, which is enable the right jobs and the right skills. How?
Actually, I was thinking about the communities and businesses, and I think I must commend the group for putting this material together. It's very impressive, and what I hadn't realised was that the public don't see the role of communities. That's what I think it says, doesn't it? When you look at the scores, the other people, the professionals, see the value of communities. But the one I really wrote down was carers and the most vulnerable. And this is, I think, what you've written here will do. It's a good piece of work.
You might have wandered on to section, the third one there, Hal, but I'm not complaining because I think what you said is really good. Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely fine. Saskia and then Karen.
Thank you. So obviously children and young people are one of those vulnerable groups. What are the plans to have meaningful consultation with them on this?
I was really pleased to go to the Secondary Schools Climate Conference last week at Hazelfield School, and there I both took part in or listened in the morning to the voices of the 19 schools that were present, and also ran a sort of a stall and a workshop in the afternoon asking for feedback from those young people. Of course, they were engaged young people on climate and nature already, but they gave us a really rounded perspective on their sense of place at the moment, and I could happily share that sort of output with you so you could sort of see if it was of interest. We would like to replicate that and have plans to go sort of up the age group, if you like, to Student Green Week with a similar piece of work. And we're just working through how we'll engage the primary schools as a sort of slightly more disparate group, if you like, of how they are coming together at the moment. That said, we recognise that every school should have a sustainability plan now in place, and so we're working through our travel officer and also directly looking and working with schools to see what's in those sustainability plans to try and identify schools that we could reach out to have more conversations with them about those plans.
Karen?
So enabling jobs and the right skills, maybe this should come from local schools and local colleges to what skills and jobs that are really needed locally. It's great to have a great education because some people are educated so high that they can't find the right job in our area. They have to travel abroad for those jobs. So I just think more schools and colleges should be more involved in the right skills in the right places, in the right areas.
Okay, just one from me. I mean, one thing that I've been a counsellor, a unitary counsellor for nearly about 7 years now. And whenever I go to talk to other sort of government funding organisations, they're all broke. It's not just the local authorities that's broke. It's the environmental agencies, it's the planning enforcement people. Any public organisation is always working under a massive strain. Now, I don't quite know what we do about that, but enabling the right jobs and skills, I mean, if we had very effective planning enforcement, for example, or fly tipping issues, or the people that talk about, look after our rivers, if they were better supported, they would be much better at doing their job, and I think our society would be a lot richer for it. So I know it's a bit weird from right jobs, right skills, but I think it's just that a lot of those public sectors are in an impossible position, in my view. Anything else for the second bullet point, or we move on to the third and final bullet point, I hope, which is about the most important vulnerable groups within our society. Okay. Yes, Ollie.
Well, Chair, I think we might have had one or two of those already coming up, but I wanted to just come back to your point about the funding for all this work, and just to outline sort of two or three things. One is, as you know, some of this funding relies on the West of England Combined Authority, and as a council we are repeatedly calling for better allocation of those funds from the West of England Combined Authority, particularly on nature and on climate and the green funds that we've seen, and we'd like to see more of that flowing. Hopefully there'll be a new settlement with the Mayor of the West of England. Secondly, as you know, the Council has also been pushing for a tourist levy that would allow us to raise additional funds locally that could be directed towards particularly green spaces and making sure that we invest in those green spaces. But I think, finally, the bigger question really comes back to national government and how national government potentially thinks about different ways of tax raising, you know, for example, from the big energy providers which are making record profits right now. So we'd like to see national government actually taking bolder action on those big energy providers.
All good points, Ollie. Okay, the only thing I would say, finally, is that it would be really good if the care sector had professional development within it, because at the moment I think one of the problems with the care sector is that it's low wage and no career structure to a higher wage. So that's my solution to what is an increasingly difficult area in our society. Anything for anybody else? Okay, now I'm guessing, as we've lost four councillors already, we're probably at the end of the meeting. I don't think anyone wants an extra session. So I think I'll close the meeting unless... yes, Saskia.
Is the future work plan not on the agenda?
Oh, yes. Which is indeed the future work plan. And does anyone have any suggestions for future items? We've got a number, but they're a bit transient, some of these. Yes, Saskia.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to bring up two things. Home to school transport now sits within our panel, and that's an 11 million budget item, and it's basically the cost is increasing. So I guess I wanted to ask if that could come to our panel at some point. And then the second one is the play. So we passed the play motion last full council, and it said council resolves to invite the appropriate PDS to consider adding the issue of play provision to their work plan, and suggest that PDS could include reviewing existing plans and strategies, identifying any gaps, and considering how council could enable more children in Baines to play more of the time. So, yeah, I welcome your...
Yeah, I am some happy with the first one, although it's home to school transport. I understand why that could come under our... But to my mind, play is more child and adult development. I would have thought... We can stick it on, but I think I need a conversation with Dina, really, to make a decision of where it goes.
This is very much about local plan and about transport as well, so that's why
I thought you said play.
Yes, local plan, new housing, where the children play.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I get all that, I'm just slightly bewildered while we're talking about that. But anyway, I'll talk to Dina and we'll come to a decision on that. But happy to take the other one. Thank you. Anything from anybody else? Okay, well, I usually keep the meeting to about 12 o'clock, but it's just gone past 1. So apologies for the extra hour. Thank you very much for all the work you did, especially the officers, and to Sarah, who's skived off somewhere, and to Ollie, who worked. And, you know, the questions were really, really good. I hope they're helpful to the officers, and we'll come back in July with a much more impressive plan, not that it's rubbish now, and a safe journey home.